General Sergei Surovikin, nicknamed General Armageddon, is President Vladimir Putin's latest appointment in the war against Ukraine. This appointment was announced hours after the attack on the Cremia Bridge, the Kerch Bridge, and the new military leader's very first day in office saw Ukraine being hit by a huge wave of missiles. It was one of the widest series of strikes seen in Ukraine in many months. But General Surovikin is not actually new to this faltering war effort. He's been commanding troops on the southern front in Ukraine. Just the day before the war began, Surovikin was sanctioned by Europe for his military influence and his relationship with President Putin. Now, this appears to be the first time that Russia has officially named a commander for its entire military operation in Ukraine. On Crux Decode, so will this be a turning point in this 8-month-long war? Will General Armageddon change Russia's fortunes by recapturing some of the lost territory? Born in 1966 in Novosibirsk, the 55-year-old General Surovikin is the veteran of Russia's recent wars. The general started his active military career in Afghanistan in the late 1980s. Now, this was in circumstances that were extremely unfavorable to the Soviet Union. The Soviets were losing that war, and they had to beat a retreat to a guerrilla army like the Taliban. Now, this shaped General Surovikin's character as well as reputation, as he was heavily involved in considerable violence. Back home, after the Afghan invasion in 1991, 3 people were killed during a clash between military vehicles and pro-democracy protesters in Moscow. Now, according to the BBC's Russian service, the protesters had blocked the vehicle's path, and General Surovikin, who was in charge, gave the order to drive on. All charges were later dropped on the grounds that he had been following orders. 4 years after that, while he was still a student at the Frunze Military Academy, the general was given a suspended sentence for illegally selling a pistol to a classmate. He claimed that he was set up, and the conviction was later stripped from his record. General Surovikin's career took a turn for the better in the early 2000s. He went on to serve in Russia's conflicts in Tajikistan as well as in Chechnya, and most importantly and most recently in Syria. That's where Moscow intervened in 2015 on the side of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. As commander of Russia's aerospace unit in Syria, despite having no experience of air operations, he oversaw the obliteration from the air of much of the Syrian city of Aleppo. Aleppo at one point of time used to be the second largest city in Syria. General Surovikin was in charge of that operation, and he was clearly prepared to use whatever measures available. He has an absolutely unforgiving attitude to the enemy. Whether it's combatants or civilians, he sees them as the same. Under the general's command, Russian forces were involved in covering for the use of nerve agent sarin gas. They witnessed it being loaded onto Syrian aircraft just minutes before a deadly chemical attack on the town of Khan Sheikhoun. In that attack, more than 80 people died. In 2017, President Putin awarded General Surovikin the Hero of Russia medal. That's the country's highest honor for his services in Syria. So why has Putin made this change now? And is it an acknowledgement that things are not going according to plan? Military experts say you don't change your military commander unless things are not going according to book. Changing the commander may bring in a different ethos, but whether it's going to make a difference to Russian capabilities, that is questionable. Surovikin's reputation of brutality may not necessarily equal territorial gains. Russia has been reshuffling its forces in Ukraine as it tries to stem the losses it's been dealt with as a result of a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Some observers believe that Surovikin's appointment signals that Russia will concentrate its war effort on one area. Now, what that area may be, it could be Luhansk, it could be Donetsk, it could also be in the south, closer to Kherson. What we're going to see is a shrinking of Russia's operations. Russian forces were driven out of much of northeastern Kharkiv, the second biggest city in Ukraine. This happened in early September by a Ukrainian counteroffensive, which basically allowed Kiev to retake thousands of square kilometers of territory. Russian troops also lost territory in the southern city of Kherson, as well as in Lyman, which is a transport hub in the eastern part. Surovikin clearly has his task cut out, and this is where his time in Syria comes into the spotlight. Surovikin's time in the Russian campaign in Syria was a pivotally important one. It was a time during which Russia was finally able to decisively shift the course of that conflict in favor of Bashar al-Assad. Surovikin's command was clinical, it was brutal, and most of all, it was calculated. He also doubled down on tactics, working with Iranian proxies in Syria, particularly the Al-Quds Force. That is an elite unit of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard, and Hezbollah, which is an Iran-linked militia group which has been designated a terrorist outfit by both the United States and the European Union. So small wonder then that right after his appointment as the commander in charge of the special military operation in Ukraine, the first set of attacks on Kiev as well as other cities was through Iranian-made kamikaze drones. It clearly shows the deep connections between Tehran and Moscow, one that Surovikin personally brings to bear. In a 2020 report regarding the military attacks on Syrian civilians, Human Rights Watch had named Surovikin as one of the several Russian commanders who knew about the abuses and took no effective steps to stop them or punish those who were directly responsible. Surovikin's main challenge in Ukraine will be to solve the structural problems plaguing the Russian military as it faces a fierce Ukrainian counteroffensive. Surovikin's appointment has, however, softened some of the public anger among Russian hardliners. In fact, they are increasingly impatient with Russia's military failures on the battlefield in Ukraine. From his time in Syria, General Surovikin had developed a good working relationship with the Wagner private military company, and his appointment, in fact, was welcomed by top critics of the war effort, including Ramzan Kadyrov, who's the head of the Chechen Republic, and the head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. But can he take on a determined Ukrainian military and a people for whom it is an existential crisis? But most importantly, can General Surovikin take on what seems like an endless NATO pipeline of weapons which are being supplied to Ukraine? This may be General Armageddon's biggest test yet.